Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while. I haven't uploaded for quite some time now, but it feels like the time is right to return. So I'm keeping an eye on the comments. If you do want to support the channel, please leave us a like. I will try and pick up comments as we go. Please also remember that we are not providing financial advice here. I will put this ticker on the bottom to remind you to please do your own research. Everyone has their own portfolios, decisions, risks, etc. So I don't say that lightly. I actually do mean that. Please do your own research. And yeah, so the plan today is, I think it's a good time to go back from the top, straight looking at the dollar. You can see the list of the things we're going to be talking about generally in the live stream. And try and come up with some themes which we'll use to carry forwards. Of course, if there's things that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, then please, comment and let me know what that might be. So we've just had CPI that come out this morning, or the afternoon for me, but it basically came in line with expectations, so not a huge amount to talk about there. The dollar generally at the moment is kind of hovering at around this sort of 98, 99 level, trying to get back above 100. Generally, when I look at the dollar, we're thinking about, are we above the 50-day moving average? Generally speaking, that typically results in a bit of a run for the dollar, but it's also below, that critical 100 level, which represents the previous range low. So obviously with risk on risk assets, we don't really want to see a really strong dollar. However, the way the world is at the moment, I could see a world in which the dollar does strengthen and things do continue to go up just purely because of how weak all of the other countries are. So while it is looking like it might try and make a move back up towards the range, I don't think it'll necessarily break through, and I also don't think necessarily it's going to change the picture as a whole. Just briefly as a reminder as well, it's always good to come back and have a look at this chart. It is somewhat delayed, but global sort of liquidity, or particularly this is the US liquidity, continues to charge higher. So we continue to see a world in which everything's effectively getting depreciated versus, well, everything's in dollar terms going up, but the dollar itself is effectively depreciating. So nothing really to change there. It's just continuous move to the upside, which again is good for risk assets. Hello, people who are saying hi. Thanks for welcoming me back. So obviously we know that money supply go up is a good thing for our investments to go higher. And, I do want to talk a little bit about what I've been doing since, as I did make it quite public, that I sold quite almost all of my Bitcoin, basically. And through that period of time, I have been investing in various other asset classes. My approach with this is to think, well, for me personally as an investor, I've been with Bitcoin for like nearly a decade, from well below $1,000 all the way up to over $100,000. And it does come a point, particularly for me, for my age, where I am in my journey, that it didn't make a great deal of sense to just remain heavily concentrated in one asset class. So, I think we have seen a lot of the OGs selling out, not that I'm an OG, but, selling out to diversify, particularly doing it towards the end of what would typically be what we would class as the end of the 4-year cycle. So I will come on to Bitcoin in more detail, but, my focus has been looking mostly at the NASDAQ, somewhat the S&P 500, but, I think the hot places to be at the moment are looking at, AI, related assets, and then everything else that goes with it. Like, for example, it's touching on everything, like including Google as well, which has been performing really well. So the NASDAQ's really where I've been looking. Well, this is a global view of some of the assets in there, but the NASDAQ, fortunately, is quite a predictable asset, really, or an asset class. It likes to pull back 30% every now and again, and then it goes on an extended run for quite a long period of time, really. So what we can see, I mean, I've been working off this chart for ages, and I was screaming not necessarily screaming, but I was shouting that when we had this sell-off, I believed that we were going to resolve much higher, in particular when we broke back across the 50-day moving average. So 50-day being the shortest moving average we have here. But yeah, we broke back above the 50-day moving average, and onwards it went. So I think the important thing for me is that, so I'm overlaying these last two events where we had one of these big pullbacks towards the 200-week moving average. And just really it represents how long these runs can go. And to me, it feels like this is a three-legged run, so 3 drives, which obviously goes higher 3 times, but it is classed as a bearish pattern, because you generally expect price to come back about 50% after the 3rd drive. So I generally think that there's a meme top on the NASDAQ, which is going to be around like 33, all the 3s. So the Masons will get their top before we see quite a big pullback. But until then, I mean, again, we do have problems with the geopolitical situation at the moment, but we've kind of been in this uncertain geopolitical landscape now, with regards to Russia, the Middle East. China's obviously bubbling away in the background, and then you've got the crazy people in charge in the EU who are kind of not getting on with the States at the moment. And ultimately, we just end up resolving higher anyway. So I think the big tell as to what's going on is, there's a massive grab of assets, not just in gold, silver, platinum, hard, actual, real life things, not just, numbers on a screen. Not just those, they've also been piling into trying to do land grabs. Obviously, we've got, the Greenland situation, got Taiwan and the Ukraine as well. So there is a very much defensive awakening, sort of a third Cold War, if you like, kind of going on. But actually, the markets don't seem to really care too much about that. It's kind of just business as usual until like the shit really hits the fan, should that eventually come. And I think that there is evidence that is unfortunately going to come about sooner or later. So yeah, in summary, NASDAQ, it's kind of going to go up continually. Like the AI bubble, as people like to call it, will continue marching on, in my opinion, until we hit towards probably, well, this is kind of saying, in terms of time, which I always think is one of the most important factors. This thing could run all the way through this year. It has actually outperformed one of the dips already, but I do expect, I don't want to talk too much about my personal positions, but I generally have a view that sort of midway through the year, sort of end of the year, if we get towards that 30,000 level, we don't know how the markets are going to respond once we hit that round number. Personally, I think for me, I will be coming out of some of these positions that I've built since Bitcoin was at the top and sitting on cash. But, we'll see. There is evidence that maybe it could continue a little bit higher for quite a long time, really, through this year. One thing, obviously, that's been important as well with the NASDAQ is looking at relative to Bitcoin, which is something that I like to do. So, of course, Bitcoin has underperformed the NASDAQ because the NASDAQ's gone up, Bitcoin's pulled back. And that was going on for quite some time. This was actually one of the charts which kind of helped persuade me, why am I sitting in Bitcoin when I'm quite happy with the run that we had, and then I want to diversify. So that has actually turned out quite nicely so far. And yeah, we'll get more into that. But the sort of continuation of the discussion about, do things generally look healthy, or as they always do? Well, the banking sector would be a good, or the financial sector would be a good place to look to see if there's any sort of real major warning signs. And again, generally just pressing higher, breaking out of the super trend as well. And looks like it's just going to continue on. I don't hold any banking assets directly, but generally speaking, looks in relatively good shape. One thing that I have been accumulating was defense stocks. It's obviously nice to say that when you've got a big green candle sat in front of you. But of course, this is just I'm using a VanEck Defense ETF, which is one of the ones I look at. Again, I'm not necessarily recommending that in any way, but it's somewhere easy to come to look at sort of the global picture, because this will include things like Raytheon, a bit of Boeing, Lockheed Martin and stuff like that. And some of my analysis or my thought processes when I was thinking about how to allocate was like, what's the obvious thing to do? It does tend to be a case that the obvious thing typically does break out. And I mean, look at this thing's going back to 2023. It's been up only the entire time, with the occasional pullback, which has been a great opportunity for buying. Any sort of pullback towards the bottom of the month, the weekly super trend, has been a great spot to buy. And obviously, based around everything else we're saying with the geopolitics stuff, I just don't see how it doesn't, how it looks good technically. From just a basic logical point of view, it seems like it might continue to go up. So defense stocks doing extremely well. And of course, similarly to the other fund out, the ETF, there's another one that I like to keep track of, which is this AI fund, which also indicates, from a technical point of view, that things may continue higher. I mean, this is sort of classic, breakout, fake out stuff, and then coming back really strong. So, originally, I think I actually got in sort of in here, and I had to suffer quite a big down for a little while, which wasn't ideal. But inverse head and shoulders. Okay, we had the breakout, fake out, and then the reclaim, as the NASDAQ reclaimed, we were talking about earlier. And then it's just been up only, and it's reached this 1.618. Obviously, within here, you're going to have a lot of NVIDIA and other AI stocks, but Google will be in here as well. But yeah, it looks like there's some still juice there, which of course corroborates the idea with the NASDAQ continuing higher as well. So those two things are kind of stacking up quite nicely. There's probably a bit of an arms race going on generally around AI to try and sort of stay ahead of the pack, assuming what we get to see with AI is the real AI that that the military have and stuff, but who knows really. But anyway, so gold was something that I was talking about for quite some time, actually. Prior to actually Bitcoin moving up, I wrote an article about how I felt that safe haven assets were grossly under invested in as a share of total assets. So, when you're in a world where the money supply looks like this, you start to question, why is it that gold hasn't been on a particularly large run to the upside as well? And obviously that is what has played out. I do keep receipts, so this was a little bit later through the run. I was saying I think that gold could hit 4,000 last year. I was saying I think by July. It was actually I was a little bit late on that, or a little bit early rather. And then I was saying I think that the top will probably end up being somewhere around 5K, which I thought might come at the end of last year. But these risk-off assets just seem to be absolute monsters at the minute. And it's like I was saying, it's like a land grab kind of scenario where everyone's just it's not good is the truth behind it, because it feels like a prelude to continued military action and it possibly escalating as well. So it's not a particularly healthy thing overall, but the pump does continue. Is it going to hit that 5K level? I memean, it's almost to some extent surpassed expectations. From the bottom, it's done a 326% move. Last time it did about 600. So could it continue higher? Sure. The dip last time was a much bigger dip. So above all-time highs, it actually only made 130%, whereas we've done 140. So while it still continues to look bullish, and obviously everything else is continuing to reprice upwards, I do think that it feels as though the top should be in sight around the 5K level to me. Certainly for a bigger correction of some sort, because you can see there on the monthly, it's just the all green candles with the odd exception here and there. So, I mean, it's definitely not something I'd want to be shorting. That's for certain. The monthly indicating if it was getting to the top, you can see the monthly super trend does tend to do a good job of telling you when it's crocked. And at the moment, that's sat around 3,500. So you'd probably expect, if we did get below that 3.5 level, for it to be the end. We can see in the previous run up, it generally came back to previous all-time high, not quite, but near enough. So are we going to see this ultimately eventually come back down when the demand goes away, or the continued sustained demand towards the 2,000 level? I don't know how that would, it seems so unlikely at the moment. But that would be, around that 2.5, 2,000 level could present some big opportunities. But as I say, I can't fathom how that would actually come about at this moment in time. Silver, as many of you know, is an asset that I've got a love-hate relationship with, because originally when I bought Bitcoin, I bought the same amount of silver, thinking I was being a genius. And while the chart was right, it was just moving it like 1,000 times slower than Bitcoin, unfortunately. So I'm happy that we have now ultimately broken out, and it has done what it should do. There's a beautiful Wyckoff pattern for silver, which has ultimately played out. It's got a fantastic cup and handle there. And if you were to hold a gun to my head and ask me where I thought this could get to, I don't see it impossible to hit around 200. I know that sounds good. It'd probably be, come shy of that, maybe 190 or something. But, and the 1.618 of this cup here is $120. So it has actually made spot all-time highs just earlier on today. And again, it looks like it's a continuation of the pump. And I don't know what that's going to mean for certain banks who've been effectively on the short side of it. Hopefully it doesn't cause a complete collapse across the board. But could this thing continue on higher? It certainly looks that way. What's going to happen around 100? You'd expect resistance at 100, wouldn't you? But typically, actually, when assets get to big round numbers, they do breach them. You think of how Sol behaved over the last cycle, and even Bitcoin, it does generally tip across eventually. Does it go on to 200? I don't know. Seems like a bit. I mean, for me, certainly, there's absolutely no chance beyond 200 that I'd want to be holding silver, to be honest. Having said that, there's a reason why the number's going up, and that's because people see these hard assets as something you actually need to own. And that is the idea. So I don't know. Do you really ever want to, if you've got some in your portfolio, do you actually want to sell it, or do you want to keep it for its actual purpose? I'll leave that up to you guys to think about. Platinum as well, similar kind of thing. I don't really track the prices of platinum, to be honest, but just for consistency's sake, it's showing, you know, a similar kind of cup and handle sort of thing going on. And you'd have to probably expect from a technical point of view that this thing looks like it could continue as well. Similar with copper. I mean, copper looks great, really, I think. You know, we're looking here at some very bad quality of your live stream. Is that just for the goats, or is that for everyone? Let me know. But anyway, you know, higher highs, higher lows. When this kind of thing breaks out, you know, a good example of this thing, something similar, doing things like this is Google. Quality's fine. Okay, mate, must just be you. So yeah, Google. I've got some of my crazy ass drawings on there, but you know, I love it when there is like one of these ascending kind of triangles, and it keeps bumping against the roof, and then broke out significantly. So Google, I had an alarm on my phone just continuously telling me to buy more Google every day, and of course I did do some of it, but I didn't buy as much as I might have done. Actually, just while we're here, I do think personally that Google is probably on a journey to about $400, which is insane if you think of the size of the company and the way in which it's effectively, I'm saying it's going to have doubled potentially, which is, yeah, bizarre. But that is the world that we're in at the moment. Again, obviously that corroborates the idea of the NASDAQ continuing and so on as well, and all the AI stocks and everything. So there is a bit of consistency here across the board. Again, copper, just coming back to that, it does look quite similar, doesn't it? You know, you'd have to sort of consider, I mean, that seems insane, but you know, technically from this little run up, if we just ignore this one over here, you know, could we see $10? Doesn't seem impossible. Again, if I was saying Google might get to 400, then why wouldn't this get up to 10? It's not something I'm particularly planning on buying, although it does look rather good, so I might need to reevaluate that. Anyway, so back to the big old coin. So I have talked a little bit about what I was up to, which was kind of, as soon as we had that incident on 1010, it felt like a kind of top event. Yeah, when there's a big old liquidation. I remember something similar happened at FTX, I think, on this candle here. You know, everyone was saying it was a worst ever crypto crash, blah, blah, blah. I mean, in terms of market cap, maybe, but not in terms of like percentage wise, and how many people got hurt. So a lot of people did get hurt in that pullback, but you know, we've seen worse, I can tell you that for certain. So I mean, overall, the key things really are, generally when we're in a bull market, Bitcoin's above the 50-week moving average. That's a given. And obviously we broke down, you know, all previous bull markets, effectively when you lose the 50, that's your sign. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we had the 50-week moving average and also the super trend here as well, and we were just drooping with no sort of hope, and Bitcoin ETF flows going the wrong way, and it wasn't looking good. And obviously we broke down and we found our way down to the 100-week moving average, which is pretty much exactly what happened last time. You know, do I think that it's going to play out exactly like last time? Unlikely, because, you know, well, firstly, off the top, you know, they took 50% of a dump to get all the way down there. We haven't actually done that. This is more like a sort of, you know, a NASDAQ-like correction, down to 35%, down to the 100. So less of a volatile move down. So, you know, less volatility currently occurring. You know, you will notice that when we do dump down, there is often a retest of this 50-week moving average, which is the yellow line. So what was the bull market support effectively becomes resistance. So a lot of people are eyeing that level. I think there's a case to be had that Bitcoin will squeeze its way up to that level from where we currently are. It looks like it wants to get there. You know, we're above the 50-day moving average, which is an important thing to look at. We've been supported by the 100-week. You know, we haven't tested these lows, which is a bit of a shame, really, because had we have cleared out all of these lows and all the liquidity associated, then, you know, I would say it would be issuing for us to get up to that 50-week level. But I think generally speaking, you know, I used to have for those of you who remember from the Telegram days, a pattern called the stiletto, which I've seen other people butcher over time. I don't know whether I came up with it, to be honest, but I used to like to see, you know, would have the stiletto bit and then would have the shoe, and then the shoe would kick up and then it would come back down. And that is actually kind of what I was expecting to happen if the 100 does give up. But also it satisfies, you know, taking out all of these highs as well, which hasn't really been done. So I'm looking out for that. Again, I'm moving very slowly in this market. I'm not trading it on a day-to-day sort of basis at the moment. I'm looking to make my move either lower or when there's confirmation of higher. You know, the advantage of making a decisive or decision earlier in when things are looking a bit ropey is that you're under a lot less pressure, like right now. So I'm not just, a lot of you will, I guess, be holding your position and sort of thinking, oh God, do I get out at the 50 or is it going to make all new time new? Like, I'm not involved in that process, which is quite a nice place to be. You know, if it comes down lower, yeah, I might be interested. If it makes that break up higher, well, what do we need to look for? Well, you know, we have this lovely confluence of resistance here and super trend, which are breaking to the downside and breaking above that. So we've got the 50-week, we've generally got structural resistance, previous support, and this super trend. So if Bitcoin starts trading above 105, 106K, reclaiming the 50-week moving average, you know, you'd have to say, well, maybe it is different this time. So what I would say, every single time we get into these, excuse me, into these kind of situations, pardon me, I've been ill for like literally a month, but nearly over that now. So anyway, when we do get to these situations, we generally have this discussion of how it's definitely different this time. So I'm mindful of the fact that we're doing what we've always done. However, I'm willing to, you know, I'm willing to see it go higher. I think all the other markets are going to go higher. So is it completely impossible for Bitcoin to do it? Well, no. You know, we have had this bear market previously where there's generally something going on, which causes these crazy sell-offs. So obviously last time we had FTX, we had Luna, you know, death spiral going on. Do Kwon was trying to hold the whole market up here, and then it all went wrong. So the only thing that feels like that being a risk is obviously MicroStrategy, but by the same token, he can service the debt quite easily. So Saylor's not in this kind of situation at the moment. So I don't know what's going to make that happen. I mean, here you had, I think Craig, right, Fake Satoshi, selling all his coins, and I can't remember what else was going on here, but yeah, there generally tends to be something driving that. I think we had Hearn quitting out over here. So what's going to cause that to happen? I'm not so sure. So yes, like a lot of you might not like the idea that I've sort of been saying, okay, the top's probably in. However, I'm willing to change. I think that is important as an investor, you know, have strong opinions, but hold them relatively loosely, you know. So what's going to send this thing all the way down there? I don't really know. I mean, maybe an onslaught from the ETFs just unwinding. Generally speaking, you know, in the previous pumps out of the lows, like over here, we saw the ETFs flows come in really, really strong and support all of this, which you can see on this chart here, where effectively the total holdings went up massively, and that at the time gave me confidence to be long Bitcoin. At the moment, we're kind of seeing the opposite. So, that's not ideal. I was very positive at the start of the year. I posted out, we're going to bounce, and we have done to some extent. But then all of these really strong purchases, I mean, nearly 700 million in a day, was just reversed over the course of the next 4 days. So I don't know what's going on there, but yesterday we had some sort of minor inflow, relatively minor inflow again, which is okay, but it's certainly not kicking on as much as you'd like to see. So I am still, not preferred necessarily, but my preferred expectation is hit that 50-week and then let's see. If we don't do that, then this is effectively a bear flag. And there's a reason why I've got the monthly super trend on there, and it could ultimately result in us getting down to that sort of into the 50s or the high 60s level. Now, how quickly should that happen? Generally, after putting the top in, you do 50 weeks or so to find the bear market lows, and then you sort of go again when it's all dead. Pretty consistent. We know that the cycles previously have been pretty good predicting all of this stuff, and that was part of the reason why I got in back into the market, was because of playing those cycles. And there's a big debate, is the 4-year cycle dead or not? Was it ever a thing? Was it just the business cycle? And I think it's, to me, undeniable that the 4-year cycle is or was a thing, mainly due to the fact that there's always been the expectation and the hype around the halving, and there's a run up into accumulation, then there's the media attention about the halving, investors and normies sort of try and pile in, then they get sort of slaughtered a bit, and then you get the outcome of the reduced inflation rate of Bitcoin. And to me, that is a very real thing. I've witnessed it and lived by it for 10 years. If you want to tell me that I've been living a lie over the last 10 years about this thing, then fine. But, I've been riding it all of those 10 years. So, I don't mind if it's made up, but I'll live by it until it doesn't work anymore. And so, yeah, I mean, the thing about this structure that we currently have is, it looks similar. It does look similar to this sort of thing. An invalidation of a right shoulder up here would be massive, in my opinion. If we get the head and shoulder, then fine. We're probably going to end up around the 200 eventually. But if that breaks, it could end up in like a really powerful move to the upside. So, yeah, strong opinions, loosely held, I think is the approach here. Could this take us up to that sort of 180k range, which is ultimately where I thought at the start of this, when we were down here, I thought we'd end up at, and we haven't yet. So it would obviously shatter the 4-year cycle idea to some regard. But as Bitcoin matures as an asset, we shouldn't be expecting this thing to continually be dumping down 80%. You can't have a $2 trillion asset, which is a serious thing, dumping off 80%, every 4 years or something. It's an insane proposition. So I'm of the opinion that ultimately we're going to have to just wait and see. I mean, the 200-week, there are some problematic things about the 200-week. So Bitcoin's always been in this super trend upside. I haven't got the total chart on here, but as you can imagine, it's always been above the monthly super trend, never below. And the slight concern is what happens if it does come below here. Does that mean it's kind of all over? Probably not, but it would mean that the very strong up-only trend for Bitcoin might be coming somewhat to an end, or a little bit of a change in regime. As I said, I think over time you should see less higher highs, like the highs of the highs are diminishing, and but so should the lows as the asset matures. People understand the inflation rate. People know that when it deviates too much to the upside, it is actually overvalued. But by the same token, assuming everything's sort of ticking along in the background, we don't have any absolutely ridiculous scenarios like we had last couple of times. We shouldn't see an 80% drawdown. So again, I think you have to be fluid or open to ideas about what might happen next. So, 70K, a little bit of a concern going below that. I'd love to see it come down to 70K-ish, taking out these lows, and then real strong rejection, and a few months, and then back above, and then see some sort of crazy run. I'd love that more than, as much as the next person. So, however, history would tell us that we still have, a good amount of time before the end, before that would happen. So maybe we do consolidate in around here somehow, and then ultimately break it and just go on, continue on to the upside, because this asset over time should, oscillate less around and just go to the upside if it's going to continue to do so. And of course, the backdrop is everything else is going up. And also, if the 4-year cycle did prove to, end quickly, and the base from which the next cycle occurs is higher, well, a lot of people are going to be left offside, and there'll be a lot of people panic buying back into the game. So, because I do think you need to think of it as a bit of a game at times. IBIT, so slightly, I was looking at this earlier. So this is obviously iShares Bitcoin ETF. Wasn't above that 50-day moving average. It is actually starting to creep above that, and neither were futures, which are trying to creep above there. So it's not quite as much of a nice outlook as we were looking at on the spot markets. Hasn't quite broken there, but again, it is still, it's trying. It's a good day for Bitcoin so far, and you can see, it's when these dumps are failing, it does give off the vibe, doesn't it, of reaching out and see what happens up around 100, in my opinion. So dominance as well. I mean, obviously Bitcoin has been the overwhelming winner of the cycle. Obviously there's some differences in and amongst there, but overall versus alts, it was best to be in the Bitcoin as generally speaking, and that is sort of trending on. We did have this pullback in middle of last year, and it's just kind of holding strong at the minute. The big thing, obviously in crypto at the minute, is the privacy coins like Monero, which looks, again, it looks like all of the other metals, and being consistent. This is the kind of thing that we like, isn't it? A huge triangle. Is it going to go on and do these crazy targets? I don't know. It seems very unlikely. But this is a convincing, in my opinion, breakout. Not hugely dissimilar, if you just bear that in mind and think about how that looks. It's not hugely dissimilar to what silver was doing around here when it was just about breaking out. So I think we could see something like continuation similar to this for Monero. Bitcoin's obviously got big problems with privacy. It's centralized to some extent now. People won't like me saying that, but in reality, when you've got such a concentration of the asset, it is largely centralized, in my opinion, particularly when you've got all of these ETFs and so on holding the coins. So could it go on up here? Yeah, it certainly looks technically pretty good. Maybe it gets a pullback to the 50-day moving average, which currently is at about 435. But I don't know. I wouldn't be holding out for it necessarily. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit late perhaps to start chasing that, unless you're, pretty nimble with dragging your stops along and so on. Ethereum, I was having a look at this earlier, and I was thinking, like, is this thing ever gonna get going again and make all-time highs? And I mean, if you step back from it, while it was an absolutely horrible cycle, it's a pretty resilient looking chart, in my opinion. It's been battered down to the 200-week moving average and been supported throughout, obviously with the exception of a short period last year. But overall, there's a lot of pressure ultimately to the upside here. And if the cycle's ending up putting in higher lows, maybe it does go on eventually to these other levels, 10, 12, and then maybe even 20K, which was what I was kind of hoping was going to happen this cycle, because obviously we're sort of drawing this from over here. But yeah, didn't come to be, and extremely painful for the Ethereums, ETHs, whatever. It must have been awful holding Ethereum through that time. But yeah, the chart, is it going to end up this being an inverted head and shoulders? I mean, if Bitcoin continues higher, then maybe it does get its moment. There is still a lot of utility for Ethereum, lots of money getting transferred around with stable coins on Ethereum still. That hasn't gone away. So yeah, I mean, it's not a completely disastrous looking chart. If the bear market scenario does play out, I think this is pretty straightforward, that we'll come back down to these lows over here, which I think, if I remember correctly, Aiden Ross, if you know that streamer in America, I think he sold the absolute bottom there, which was delightful. So yeah, Ethereum, I think eventually it will break out, is my gut feel. So maybe that'll be something for some of you out there. So MicroStrategy, potential, like for those of you who were following the live streams and during the cycle, I was sort of seeing MicroStrategy as a bit of a canary in the coal mine. I.e., you take the canary in with you, and if the canary dies, you probably don't want to be in there, and it's a good early warning sign. And that is what happened. So this is MicroStrategy over Bitcoin. You can see like this started dumping off way before the top actually was put in on Bitcoin. And, it's sort of trying to find a bottom here. And you can see it is up versus Bitcoin today, 2.89 versus Bitcoin's 1.5 or whatever it was looking at before, 1.6 now. So a little bit of a corner potentially turn there. And I do think it's something worth keeping an eye on. It's difficult to get Bitcoin in tax efficient places for certain residents of certain countries, and MicroStrategy is a way of doing that. And obviously the share price is, MicroStrategy as a whole is a lot less liquid than Bitcoin, so it shifts around a bit more. But yeah, it's a bit of a basket case at the moment. So there's nothing here to buy yet, but I think it's worth keeping on the radar. See if it can get back above that 50-day moving average. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for crypto. I mean, the total chart obviously just looks like Bitcoin on the whole. XRP, I guess we could have a quick look at while we're here. Looks a little bit ropey, or it was looking quite ropey. Obviously, it had this catastrophic sell-off. It was that 10-10, yeah. All the way back to the 200 weeks. So I don't know if anyone, and $1 as well. Or what an entry that would have been. But it's lost its weekly trend at the upside. It's a bit ugly at the moment. Okay, it's above the 50-day moving average. The 50-week moving average is, decisively the downside. But if similarly to Bitcoin, it can start making moves above that weekly level and the 50-week moving average, potentially game on for this asset. So 2.5 is the level. Is it going to get to $589 or whatever the meme was? I don't know. I doubt it. But yeah, maybe it eventually could get up to these higher levels, $4.5, $5. But as it currently stands, I wouldn't be surprised if Bitcoin does, the bearish position of Bitcoin does fully play out. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately you're down at the $1 again level, and that would probably be the bottom. I think it's already signaled that that is likely to be the case by this candle here. So yeah, above 2.5, interesting. At $1, also interesting, which is fine. How does Solana look? Let's have a little look, actually. Solana, oh, it was the oh so nearly breaking out last during the cycle so many times, but failing. Not totally dissimilar to how a lot of the other charts look, but yeah, did it actually put in a new all-time high? Just very briefly, yes. I mean, it did look fantastic when we were over here, I have to say. You know, we had this kind of inverse head and shoulders with a potential target of, you know, like 2K or even higher potentially, but it's just gone sideways, hasn't it? Since, what's that? Since March. So it's been going sideways for a long period of time, but similarly to what I was saying with Ethereum, if it can kind of stay up and around these levels, its 200-week moving average isn't a million miles away. See here, we've got the 50-week, the 100-week moving average, break above the super trend as well, all at the same time. You'd have to fancy it at least to have a go, I'd say, back towards 250. By which point, you know, then you'd be considering those, not necessarily the heights that I was mentioning before, but you would be expecting this consolidation to resolve up towards maybe 434, 600 level at least. So again, another one to watch, some nice clear cut levels. You know, momentum will be a complete mess on this thing. Yeah, you can see it's just drifting. I mean, if it all goes wrong, I think that it's likely that, you know, we'll see this thing potentially collapse. I mean, hopefully it wouldn't go down that low. It would be brutal if it went back towards $30 or something. That would be a bit of a nightmare. So no man's land at the minute, helpfully supported by the 200-week moving average, is the gist of that one. So yeah, interesting outlook. Like, you know, the world seems like this really dangerous place, and I do think it probably will come to a head. Everyone's gobbling up assets, land grabs, gold, silver, platinum. We've got this AI thing going on in the world, and Bitcoin's just sort of, Bitcoin and crypto are kind of just part of, they're just in the mix, aren't they? But we're in this mix of environment where sort of we're not sure anything could kind of happen here. And as with that, I think, you know, my closing comments really and theme throughout has been, you know, I think you have to be fluid with this thing. You know, I don't think sitting here thinking I'm not buying for 12 months from the top, and that's the way it's going to be. I don't think that is the right approach this cycle. So yeah, interesting levels to come. Nice round numbers that we can remember, around 100K. I do think that the NASDAQ's going to continue higher. Gold's probably got a bit of juice still left in it. Silver's still pumping. Copper's still, I mean, it must, you know, obviously the right thing to do here would have been potentially to have rotated out of Bitcoin into any of this other stuff that has been flying to the upside. You know, we'll see Google, I think, potentially get on to those levels, and then we'll have this massive correction of some sort. But until then, the trend is your friend, particularly in all of these other assets, and Bitcoin at the minute. The trend is saying that it's down, but that could change, and we will have to potentially change opinion at that point. I'd love to see this resolve higher, as I think most of you guys would. Yeah, silver, it is parabolic. They all are. Everything is. But this is it does go to show this is what happens when you've had an asset which has been winding up, massively mispriced for long periods of time. this is what the outcome's going to be. It's just a question of, can you hold on to an asset for all of this period of time, when it could have been, you could have been making, I don't know, 5,000x in Bitcoin instead. But hey ho, up's up. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. Please give it a like if you did enjoy the live stream. It will encourage us to do some more. If you've got any comments around the kind of things you'd like to see me do plan on doing this at least once a week. Maybe we'll probably try and stick to two o'clock on my 2 o'clock anyway, on a Tuesday. But yeah, otherwise, I hope you're all well, and good luck in the markets. Don't do anything stupid. Remember, survival is key.